Welcome back. You're watching the Power Breakfast Show. Transparency International's new corruption perception index shows Kenya is yet to make notable gains in the fight against corruption despite the anti-graft war spearheaded by President Uhuru Kenyatta. In the index released yesterday, Kenya stands at number 139, 28 places behind Somalia, which emerged as the most corrupt country in the world. And this morning we're joined by the Executive Director of Transparency International Kenya, Mr. Samuel Kimeu, to have this conversation. Remember, any questions, comments, suggestions you might be having, 22422 is the SMS line, or you can get us on Twitter. The hashtag is Power Breakfast. For now, I hand you over to Mutegi. Mutegi?
Karibu bwana. Wale ya makompe?
Salama sana Mutegi. Yes.
Now, the Corruption Perception Index, I know you've been here talking about many times.
Sure.
But maybe for the sake of our viewers, tell us what it is, Corruption Perception Index.
Well, Corruption Perception Index is an aggregate score that measures the perception of corruption in different countries and territories. And just to clarify, that aggregate means that it is a product that is made from different data sources. Not primary data, but secondary data. We rely on data that is collected by different reputable institutions across the world, including the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, and others. So it's an aggregate index. This year, we looked at 12 different data sources from 11 different organizations. And for any country to be included in the list, it has to have at least 3 such data sources. Again, by way of defining what corruption is, we define corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain.
This is only perception of in public sector?
Yes. We are talking of the perception of corruption in the public sector.
Why not private?
Well, there's a different tool that measures private sector corruption. We call it the Bribe Payers Index.
Of Bribe Payers Index?
Yes.
The private sector do not receive bribes themselves?
The private sector do receive bribes, but it's usually quite difficult. At the moment, it's quite difficult to measure that. We've not come up with tools that help us measure that.
Are there some countries which are not measured in the world?
True. As I said, that for any country to make it into the index, it has to have at least 3 sources of data. And in this list, you will notice that from last year, we have omitted 7 countries. That includes Barbados, Bahamas, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Swaziland, and 2 others.
Why was Swaziland excluded?
Well, it's when the data source is not there. If you cannot get more than at least 3 data sources for a country, we do not consider that as reliable data to give us a good aggregate that we can use to compare.
Was it there before, Swaziland?
Yes.
It has now been?
It was.
Then why did the data disappear to?
Well, if you look at the sources that we have listed there, it means that there are certain sets of data that were not available to us for these countries in the last 1 year.
Tell us about the status of Kenya.
Well, Kenya has scored 25 out of 100, and the index here ranges from 0, which is considered the most corrupt, to 100, which is perceived as the cleanest. And Kenya has scored 25, basically out of 100. What this means is that Kenya is in the last quartile in that index. We looked at 168.
It is like if we are doing an examination, Kenya scored 25%.
Sure. Sure.
It means we failed completely.
Yes, it means that we have indeed failed.
And the statement here shows that Kenya is below Somalia.
Well, Kenya is not below Somalia because Somalia is the last in the rank with a score of 8 out of 100. But we also know that the challenges Somalia has. And if you look at the index, you will notice that the countries that are trailing are mostly countries that have had conflict and strife ongoing for quite some time. So there's a correlation between the levels of corruption and conflict in that index. So to the extent that we are not very far off from Somalia and others is actually an indictment that we need to pull up our socks, because we've not gone through the same experiences that many of these countries have gone through, that they can use to explain why things are the way they are.
The perception a number of Kenyans have is that Nigeria is more corrupt than Kenya. What is the situation, what's the relation between where Kenya is and where Nigeria is?
Well, I think there's one point that needs to be underscored.
Yes.
Nigeria has had a difficult past with corruption. It still has challenges with corruption, but Nigeria has made progress. I think Kenyans, and I have had many of our leaders, when they talk about corruption, refer to Nigeria as if Kenya is better than Nigeria. If we do not take care, very soon we will realize that Nigeria will not be able to compare to us, simply because there has been action in the last 5 years or so where people have gone to jail, and highly placed public officials are going to jail. Nigeria has recovered assets from different, from the Sani Abacha regime and other leaders. Governors have gone to jail in Nigeria in the recent few years, and now with the Buhari effect, with the Buhari effect, we are looking at a possibility where political commitment at the highest levels might just push Nigeria to a level where it cannot compare with Kenya.
In fact, the chief of military has been taken to court.
Indeed, and for very serious offenses, in my view, and which in my view might be even replicated here, but we have not taken action, because we know corruption in the security sector is an area that is highly protected, and we may not be able to get the full truth out of what happened.
In fact, I think, judging from the latest utterances from the government, they would like even the Auditor General not to scrutinize security within Kaisari and those people. They would like the military not to be audited properly, or audited in a way that's not made public.
Indeed, that is what they want, which is really tragic. The Auditor General must be able to examine every statement of accounts in this country. I do agree that once he has done that examination, the way you treat certain sensitive security information needs to be different from the way you treat everything else. But it cannot be a justification to create a legal lacuna where the Auditor General cannot see, and really no one can see except those who are charged with the management of security in this country. We have burned our hands before. A lot of the security, the corruption cases we deal with, including Anglo-leasing, have had to do with the security sector. So it's not a sector that is immune to corruption, and we do know that our leaders have mismanaged resources in this sector previously, and there is reason to believe that that can happen even now. The Auditor General needs to have access to statements relating to security organs, to deal with them and give his opinion, but the way we deal with what comes out of it is what should be treated differently for security reasons.
Rwanda had a prolonged instability from '94, and Rwanda is ahead of Kenya. How did it happen?
Well, Rwanda is ahead of Kenya and ahead of many countries in Africa. In fact, Rwanda is one of the few African countries that has made it past the 50-point mark in that index. They are at 54, having improved from 49 in the previous index. And I think what has happened is that after the genocide, Rwanda had a new beginning, and that new beginning is paying off. There's a different way in which things are done in Rwanda that if we were to borrow that from in the Kenyan context, we would make a lot of efforts. One, you have a bureaucracy that generally works. You know, if you have a complaint about corruption or inefficiency in government, you have a recourse, and you know if you report that there is a likelihood that something will be done. I have looked at also the length of time it takes to conclude cases in Rwanda, and it's a fairly short time. compared to Kenya. There is a sense of responsibility, even at a personal level, that is observed by the entire bureaucracy, that you find a bit unique and different from what you find in the rest of the East African countries. That could be, in our assessment, one of the contributory factors that helps Rwanda score quite highly in this region.
But if you look at the freedom, in the sense of freedom of the press, expression of the individuals, in Rwanda it's worse than Kenya. Why is it that therefore they know not corruption?
Well,
yeah,
I think it could be true that looking at different indices, the issues of personal freedoms in Rwanda is not as high as in Kenya, and the media freedom. And countries that have generally performed well in that index, like the Nordic countries, have the characteristic of being having a free media, being democracies that respect rights and the personal space. But Rwanda is a bit of a contradiction. But I see what contributes to the Rwanda success as the efficiency of the system. That in our case, if you look at the other studies that we have done, people pay bribes because they want to hasten a service, or they want to access a service that they were otherwise not entitled to. So that if you were to deal with the efficiency aspect of it, then you deal a serious blow to corruption. Because if I can access my passport, I can access the company registry within a reasonable period of time, that will have some spin-off. And I think there's some movement in that direction in our case. And that, I suspect, will, if it is sustained and enhanced, will be picked up by these indices in the coming year or the year after. But we've started from a fairly low ground, and we need to sustain some momentum, to pick up some momentum and sustain it by way of ensuring that our public services are more efficient than they have been.
But I don't know, because between now and the last assessment,
yes,
where are we? Did we went down or went up?
We have basically stagnated, because the last score, 2014, was 25 out of 100, the same way that we have scored the same score for this year. It is only the ranking that changed, and last year we were ranked 145 out of 175. This year is 139th out of 168. And there are two reasons why a country can go up and down the index, and that is either because it has improved or deteriorated in score, or other countries have improved or deteriorated in score. And in our case, we have remained stagnated on the score, but have basically gone up on the ranking.
Now, really, I don't understand, because if you look at the government and the Jubilee people, when they talk, they have made their pledge, actually, the pledge of the Jubilee during the elections was to introduce ICT. They have the hubs, they have the IFMIS, they have even the cost of doing business is less. Why can't we improve? Maybe this perception is not accurate. Why is those improvements not reflected in this?
When you're talking about perceptions, perceptions are informed by reality, and the way it is that perceptions lag behind reality, and at some point will catch up with reality and overtake it. And when things are changing in the opposite direction, perception will also lag behind, but will also catch up with reality. In our context, I think what is happening is that it is only last year, since the Jubilee government came into power, that we have seen some action and some rhetoric by way of dealing with corruption. We have not seen the results yet. It is true that we have many cases now in the courts, perhaps a bigger number than we've had at any other time in the history of this country. But those cases are still in the formative stages of adjudication, and possibly if the initiatives that the Chief Justice has put in place, establishing a division on economic crimes and corruption, with officers who will be detailed to listen to these cases continuously without unnecessary breaks until they are concluded, then we could possibly see these cases being concluded end of this year or next year. But from where we have come from and where we are, these cases take a very long time to conclude. So the initiatives that started last year may not yield results at least before the end of this year. And results are the ones that will inform perceptions. At the point when people will be punished, people go to court, at the point when resources will be recovered, resources that have been stolen from the public, then we will begin to see that change in the perception of the corruption levels in this country.
But I'm very pessimistic myself. If you look at the history of corruption in this country, look at Golden Bag. No money was recovered, maybe not much.
Yeah.
Even the hotel.
Yeah.
If you look at agro-leasing, people have been taken to court, the case flopped.
Yes.
Nobody was jailed, nobody was prosecuted, no money was covered. Either Golden Bag, agro-leasing, now we have Eurobond.
Yes.
Which is still in abeyance.
Yeah.
Why should we expect there will be an improvement?
Well, there is always a beginning point, and if we are serious as a country and we go after those who have stolen public resources and recover those resources and punish them, then we can begin to improve in the index. At the moment, I agree with you that the recoveries are too little. We know in the agro-leasing that some money was wired back by some ghost from somewhere, but that was it. And
but
right now,
we ended up paying the same.
Yes.
We paid for this, the fake contracts.
We did. We have actually paid quite an amount of money as late as the last few months on this issue. And this was done through an executive order when a lot of Kenyans were not convinced that it was the right thing to do. We as Transparency International still hold the view that we were actually, there was no justification for us to pay these amounts of money. And if indeed there was any justification, it basically means that the people, the so-called Anglo-Leasing ghosts, are actually not ghosts, but there are people, real people that we can hold to account. But let me make an important point on this issue, and it's the issue of beneficial ownership. That in this country, we need to think very seriously about the vehicles that we allow people to register to do business and transact and move money around. Because that is the biggest loophole now that is being used by corruption cartels to steal from the public and to launder their resources. We need to know who is behind these companies. We need to know for any company that is operative in this country, it should be possible to know who is the real owner of that company. At the moment, it's pretty difficult.
Then we go to counties.
Yes.
Corruption has been devolved.
Yes. I would rephrase it and say that the opportunities of corruption have been devolved and multiplied many times over by the establishment of the counties. And with opportunity and without the necessary disincentives to engage in corruption, then it is not a surprise that the levels of corruption will have gone up in the counties.
And finally, what do you think about Eurobond? We have seen the governor of Central Bank.
Yeah.
We have seen Raila. We have seen Treasury.
Yes.
What is the view of your organization about this matter?
Well, our view about this issue is that there are still questions that have not been resolved. We've looked at figures that are being given out by the government. They have not added up, and they do not add up. So we expect that there will be explanations backed by documentary evidence that show what exactly happened in Eurobond. But there is an even more, another important issue that is important to raise about the Eurobond, that this money was borrowed for infrastructure, but it seems that we've ended up using it to, one, pay other loans, and secondly, on recurrent expenditure, which is really tragic. I think even from a layman's point of view, from a financial management perspective, you are discouraged from borrowing to pay. And that is exactly what we are doing. And again, our debt is continuing to grow. And I do know that last year we had to reschedule the repayment of part of our debt. I think it's a matter that we need to reflect on very critically as Kenyans, and we should not just take what government says at face value. We have been told a lot about the debt, and every time the red line seems to be shifting. I remember a few years ago they used to talk about 40% of the GDP being the acceptable. We've crossed that line, and it continues being extended, and we are told that as long as you are spending this money on capital expenditure, you can actually go to a higher threshold. The problem is, if you look at the figures that have been released on the Eurobond, it's quite clear that a significant amount of that money went into paying debt and recurrent expenditure. That is problematic for a country.
The way to end corruption is to make it expensive to corrupt, to make it not worth it. But in Kenya, you steal, you bribe away, and nothing happens. If you steal 50 million and you say, okay, you give 25, and you remain 25, you'll be okay. Because there is a problem of investigation, there is a problem in prosecution, and now there is a problem even in the judiciary, the way it looks. With the Chief Justice saying, oh, there's corruption here.
Yes.
So where are we headed? It looks like it's all gloomy in this country. Well,
I think, Mutegi, the Chief Justice is right and justified in making that observation, because the statistics bear him out that there is corruption in the judiciary. And if you remember the initiatives that came up around the time we were putting together the Constitution to try and clean up the judiciary, it was because Kenyans had lost confidence in the judiciary, largely because of corruption and other factors. So from 2010 to around 2012, the levels of confidence in the judiciary were rising, and the levels of corruption were also going down. But from around 2013, they seem to begin to pick up again, so that the levels of corruption 2013-2014 in the judiciary indicate that there is a gradual rise, which is a significant source of worry for Kenyans, because the judiciary occupies a very central position in the stability of this country. If we do not have a judiciary that we can trust, if Kenyans do not believe that you can go to court and get a just outcome, it would be tragic for this country. But let me say that acknowledging that there is a problem is a first step, and an important step at that, because you remember we spend a lot of time in this country trying to deny that corruption exists, or even to try and say that the levels are not as reported. The second step, of course, is to take action, and there is no institution that is immune to corruption. What is important is what is done to corruption when it arises, and what is done to prevent it from occurring. So the big story in the judiciary for me is not that allegations of corruption have been leveled against judicial officers. It is whether the judiciary has the mechanism and is prepared to deal with those issues when they come up, and deal with them fairly and conclusively. Yes, the issue of whether corruption pays or not, today you can comfortably say empirically that it pays to be corrupt in this country because people have not been punished. But that could change very, very fast. And if, for example, we were to get punishment on some of the cases that are now in the courts, we see people going to jail, and especially highly influential political and economic elites, we would begin to see that rolling back. Just early last week, there was the study that was released by the East Africa Institute on the youth, and the youth were saying that they have no problem engaging in corruption as long as they are not caught and punished. And they have learned that in this country, the being caught and punished is not there, and there is a lot of lip service that has been paid to this issue. So if we were to deal with that issue of punishment, apprehension and punishment, then we would make great strides in dealing with the issues of corruption. And I think, Mutegi, we do not have a choice. We are at a level where if the levels of corruption are to continue, they pose the greatest threat to this country.
But the politicians don't care. If you look at the, and I don't know, the President Kenyatta the other day at State House, he invited members of private sector and everybody, including Safaricom and everybody else, and tried to do something. Do you think that is effective?
Well, I think what the President is doing is important. He may not achieve the results that he wants, but at least for the first time in a long time, we have seen a few initiatives that would potentially yield some results. And actually, there are quite a number that have been put in place that could be amplified. One of the things that is not talked about a lot is the efficiency at the port of Mombasa. And one of the presidential initiatives when the president came into office was to promise Uganda and Rwanda in particular that they were going to make the port more efficient, so that the time it takes to clear and transport goods would be less. I do not know how far that has gone, but clearly there is some progress. And if that is true, and the automation of the processes, because a study that we did in 2011 indicated that the reasons why people pay bribes in that port process is because there's a lot of documentation that is needed, very complex, and so you need some to grease the system to help you navigate through the difficulties of going through this documentation. When you have a single window system, it basically means that you cut off a lot of the opportunities for corruption. So it may not be seen as an anti-corruption measure, but indeed the impact of it is positive. If you look at the registration document, the e-government, e-citizen initiatives have great potential for this country. You know, being able to renew your license from the comfort of your room, just on the computer and paying by M-Pesa, cuts off the opportunity for corruption significantly, leave alone decreasing the cost of accessing that service. Because initially you had to travel to a KRA office to go and apply for your driving license, and wait until it is ready, go back and pick it. Now you can process that within a few minutes using technology without any person coming in between you and the outcome you are seeking to ask you for a bribe. That is important. It can be amplified and can pay great dividends for this country.
Do you have any faith, or what your position about the existence of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission?
Well, as an organization, we see the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission as an important cog in our fight against corruption. I do know that there are many people who have felt that this institution does not serve any purpose, that it has missed opportunities. I think the institution has challenges, but those challenges are challenges that we have thrown their way. Our leadership has thrown their way, our politicians have thrown those challenges their way, but the role of an anti-corruption commission in any country is extremely important. It is for us to look at the configuration that we need to give it to be able to make it more successful. We need to give it the resources that it needs. We need to put in place staff who have the capacity to do the work. But more important, and this is one of the missing points that we have seen in the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, we need to insist on accountability. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's only Parliament that is well placed to look at or to instill an audit of the complaints that have been handled by the EACC. Until that issue is resolved, because it was at the core of the altercation between the commissioners who left and the Secretariat. There were accusations and counter-accusations about interference on different files. We need an independent voice to go in there and tell us this is the status of the complaints that have been received. These ones have been resolved, these files have been closed, these have not been worked on for this and that reason. And we need to be convinced that there are no gatekeepers trying to make sure that some files do not move forward while others can move forward. So the EACC for us is an important part in the fight against corruption in this country.
For some time there are no commissioners now, but now they've appointed new ones for the last few days also.
Sure.
If you are one of them, if you are one of the fellows, the new commissioners, what would you do with the staff?
Well, the law as it is now provides that the Secretariat will go through vetting. So their first assignment is to do a vetting, which is important because there were allegations that were made against staff in the commission that have not been put to rest. They have not been put to rest because there hasn't been any credible investigation of those allegations to discount them and therefore clear those members of staff from any wrongdoing. That would be the beginning point. But secondly, the commission must not lose an opportunity to look at what I have talked about, an audit of all the complaints that have been received. Look at the protocols of handling those complaints when they have been received and how they are handled. Is there a system of ensuring that there is no complaint that falls off the table without being addressed? And to seal any loopholes that interest groups might have to interfere or influence the work of the commission. I think that would be extremely important. But also important is for the commissioners to build capacity for that institution. And I think there has been a willingness on the part of this government based by the increase in the budget allocations for the EACC, as well as development partners to help in this regard. I would, if I were the new commissioners, I would tap into these opportunities to create a very formidable institution that can actually deliver ultimately for the benefit of Kenyans.
Somebody is asking a question which I wanted to ask about police. One of the ways of fighting corruption through proper investigations.
Sure.
When the cases are brought to the DPP or to the Ethics and Corruption Commission, they complain about investigations. How do we help? First, when you do corruption in Kenya, all this police comes number one or number two.
Yes.
So with this kind of police, although we have in fact, when the police vetting is being done, you can see the way police, ordinary policemen, superintendents of police are millionaires. They don't even go for their salaries.
Yeah.
They don't get up, they don't collect the value of money. In fact, the other day we learned about how they have intricate systems of junior officers sending money to their bosses through M-Pesa.
Sure.
With this kind of situation, what is the hope?
Well, I know that it's a question that I've been asked because of the frustrations of the lack of progress in holding people to account. There are those who have argued that the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission is not placed to do its duties properly. But remember, even the investigators that the EACC would ordinarily use are also drawn from the police, and they have the capacity to get investigators from any quarters that they need and to beef up their skills to be able to do the work. So I do not think it's really an excuse. It's true that the police are usually well trained to be able to do investigations, and that is a resource that the EACC can tap either by way of cooperating with the police themselves or by way of employing people who have a police background to do their investigations. Mutegi, the situation we are in is such that we must make progress. It's true that the police have had integrity challenges, partly because we have neglected that institution for a very long time as a country. So what we are doing now is actually paying for our neglect for that institution. And this neglect includes our inability to hold the police to account when things started going wrong and they were given political cover to do what they wanted. That has changed because the legal framework has changed. The politics of the day may not quite fully support impunity, total impunity within the police, and you can see there is some movement. I think we need to scrutinize what is happening within the police service and support the initiatives that exist. And I'll give you a few that I am aware of. They have established an internal affairs unit that is charged with upholding ethics within the police service. Something that I have seen in other countries, and I've always wondered why in this country such a unit that is functional did not exist. I think it's a positive step that needs to be looked at. They have a directorate of reforms that can actually be tasked with bridging the gap between what the law says and the aspiration of Kenyans and the status of things as they stand today. But bottom line for the police is the accountability question, and it's not just for the police. Remember when I was talking about whether we can actually make progress in the fight against corruption, I have insisted on personal responsibility also, because institutions work through individuals. So if a case has not been properly investigated, if there is evidence that there are stones that are unturned, and I am the investigating officer, there should be a system of holding me to account for my failure to discharge my responsibility. And I should be able to give reasons why I think I have done my best. And if my best is below par, it is a question of incompetence. It means I am not fit for that job. But if I can explain professionally why that I have done my best, and other people can assess and see I've done my best, then it is well and good. But in a context where corruption is endemic, like Kenya, our failure to punish is not explainable. It can only be explained by the collective and individual failure of the accountability legal chain for corruption cases.
There has been ongoing police vetting by the police service.
Yeah. Mm.
And we have seen a lot of policemen appearing there being sacked. But
yeah,
does it have an impact, that vetting process?
Well,
do ordinary policemen, when they're working every day behind their heads, know that whatever I'm doing, it is subject to vetting? Do you think that happens?
Well, I think the impact is there somewhat. It may not be as dramatic as a lot of people had hoped. But the impact is there, because remember when the vetting was announced, there are some officers who have left even before being vetted. So there are not many, but that indicates that the vetting exercise is not an act in futility. Secondly, you have seen that those who have issues have had to go through a difficult time explaining those issues, and some of them have been found unfit to continue to hold their positions on account of those issues. So for anyone who is going to face the vetting board, and is a policeman, I can see that there will be more and more who will not want to face the vetting process if they have issues that are standing. But statistically, there's actually a small impact. Looking at the last 5 years, we've seen that there's a marginal improvement in the ranking of the police in terms of experiences. It is true that they are way beyond everyone else, but when you begin to see the graph beginning to point downwards, it means that there's probably something that can be sustained and that can give results over time.
Well, we established IPOA to monitor police and their performance.
Yes.
I'm not sure that the IPOA deals with the corruption, but I think that's the business of the vetting board and the police service. But what do you think is the impact of IPOA?
I think IPOA has also had some impact in the sense that it is an independent authority that is established to exercise civilian oversight over the police. They have dealt with quite a number of cases on this issue, and I do know that at some point there hasn't been very good relations between them and the police, because the police, some would tend to argue that they cannot do their work because of IPOA, because IPOA stands in their way to absolute impunity on a number of issues. So I think IPOA has had an impact, and perhaps one way of explaining that the impact has been there is the latest attempt last year, towards the late last year, to subjugate the commissioners of the Independent Police Oversight Authority to the presidency. That was, of course, revised and removed from the miscellaneous amendments bill, but it was a clear indication that someone within the executive is very uncomfortable with the positioning of IPOA and the potential to change the game plan for the policing sector. So that in itself tells you that IPOA is having some impact. Of course, as all institutions, there is a lot that can be done, but we need to appreciate that the institutions plays an important role.
Sometimes last year, the president tabled some document in Parliament of the people suspected to have been corrupt, and the view of some Kenyans is that that was just showmanship, that nothing has happened. They were given a deadline to deal with them.
Yes.
The deadline came and went.
Yeah. Well, I think that list was not an act in futility. There are, of course, a lot of questions about why the president chose the strategy he chose, and unless, of course, he's able to explain himself, it is difficult to understand why he did what he did. But the truth is that the numbers that we have seen, the increase in the number of cases that have been investigated by the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, the number of cases that the DPP has okayed to go ahead for prosecution, have increased quite significantly in the last 1 year, largely because of that initiative. So the initiative has had an impact in increasing the numbers. But the initiative also put a lot of pressure on our institutions to be able to deliver. And at some point, institutions need some shock therapy to realize that they need to deliver. The pressure was initially on the ESCC and the prosecution, and right now that will move to the judiciary, because Kenyans want to see these cases concluded, and concluded within a reasonable time. And there is justification in law and in the philosophy of fairness and justice to conclude these cases fast, because those people who are charged are not necessarily guilty. And you want to make sure that whether someone is ultimately declared guilty or not, you also consider their rights and welfare. But the bigger issue for Kenya is that there is a bigger public interest in having these cases concluded fast, so that we can move on as a country.
You mentioned the case of the research done by Khan University.
Yes.
Where the youth are not worried if they are corrupt or not, as long as they get rich.
Yes.
But isn't that the case with the general Kenyan view? If, for instance, you are named as a thief, or you are in that list, or you are suspended as a cabinet secretary because of corruption, and you go to look for vote, will people not vote for you because you are corrupt?
Well, I think that has been a major problem, and I agree with you that the youth are just reflecting what the rest of the society holds to be true. Otherwise, we would not be seeing people who are known to be corrupt being celebrated. And truth is that in this country, you need people to vote for you to occupy public office. To the extent that Kenyans have not rejected people who are known to have engaged in corruption, it basically means that we may not achieve our goals through the election process. But the other point that needs to be made is that there is need to support institutions. There is need for support to Kenyans from institutions that are established to make sure that only people of a certain integrity standard make it to public office. In the last elections, it would be important to note that there are people who clearly had integrity issues that were cleared through and through into to get it onto the ballot, and ended up being elected as members of parliament who sit in parliament today. The same applies to the county assemblies. Our institutions in the last election failed us in sieving off people who had criminal records, people who had been convicted of economic crimes, yet the law is quite clear. And also, I mean, the issue of wealth declarations, it's not one of the requirements for one to be cleared. I mean, just to show that to be cleared to be on the ballot for an elective position, while you are asked if you've paid your higher education loans board or higher education loan, or whether you have paid your taxes, it seems not to matter, at least from the perspective of our electoral laws, whether you've declared your assets or not, assuming you are a public official who is bound to do that every 2 years.
So what's the way forward?
Well, the way forward is that we need to hold people to account for what they are supposed to do. While it is,
when we say we, means who?
Well, it means, one, our leaders, because we have a constitutional structure in this country that has checks and balances. Parliament, for example, is supposed to ensure that our independent institutions perform. The executive is supposed to ensure that everyone who falls within the structure of the executive acts with integrity and does their work. The same thing happens to the Judicial Service Commission, is supposed to ensure those working in the judiciary are people of integrity and perform their work.
Yesterday in the social media there was a big battle between the Chief Justice and the leader of government, Duale, about who is more corrupt. Is it Parliament or Judiciary? With those kind of exchanges, where, as I said before, where is the hope? Who will check who?
I think
who will bear the card?
It's pretty much an unnecessary exchange, if you ask me, because Parliament has had deep integrity issues, and there are issues that Parliament itself has not been able to resolve, so that today some of the biggest challenges in our journey towards greater integrity as a country are in Parliament. But when I say that we, I also mean the Kenyan public, because ultimately, if Parliament cannot sort the integrity issues out, and we know that they have a critical role to play in our journey towards greater integrity, then it's upon the Kenyan people to make sure that those who have refused to perform or who have become obstacles in our pursuit of integrity are cleared out of the way. And the elections are coming up. It is time that Kenyans woke up and decided that those who are being mentioned adversely in matters of integrity do not come anywhere near public office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamau. I hope members of the public realize that it is your business to make sure that you don't corrupt or do not receive corruption and you don't corrupt us.